Hello and welcome back to the 2 1/4 diesel Land Rover Series truck. Engine kind of freshen up. So we're going to work on the pistons. We're going to get the piston rings in, install the pistons, and hook up the connecting rods in there. So thank you for everybody who's liked and subscribed and followed along. So let's get started. So we're looking at the pistons here. You can see they're pretty crusty up on top or whatever, but the pistons themselves don't look too bad. They look pretty clean all around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to soak them in some lacquer thinner, maybe even some diesel as well. Maybe I'll throw some of that in there too or whatever, but it'll definitely be mostly lacquer thinner. You get this, you get the black off of there, let them soak for a few days. They should be clean. We'll take a closer look at it then. So I got all the pistons soaking in lacquer thinner right now. All the ends down inside. I took all the piston rings off. And as I was taking them off, I measured inside the bore. Let's walk over. Inside the bore of each one, I took the piston rings in there and measured the gap. The ring gap or whatever. So Google that if you want to see how to do that. But basically just take your ring, you push it down inside, just the ring by itself, and you kind of keep it the same distance around in there, and you measure your gap in there with a feeler gauge. So here's what we got here. According to our green Bible here, our piston rings, compression number 1, the top one, gap, here's our gap, bore or whatever. Here's our gap we have between 14 to 19. It's actually chromium plated, and it still had the chromium plated on it. It was real shiny. But we need to fall between 14 and 19. So here we got number 1, we're at 16. Number 2, 16. Number 3 is we're at 13, which is actually pretty tight. And then 16. So for number 4. So we're within spec for our first number 1 piston ring. Number 2 and 3, this is where we start having problems. Gap in the bore, we have 10 to 15 inch. At 0.0, when I say 10, it's in third places. In third places, that's 15. So 10 and 15 is where we need to be. So we go to number 1 piston, we're at 20 and 20. So 2 and 3 were basically not given enough compression. Next one down, sorry, it's terrible writing. It's 21 and 20 with my greasy hands and writing it down. So number 3, we're at 19 and 21. Number 4, we're 21 and 19. So we're out of spec for compression ring 2 and 3. So that's one of our problems that we were having. We were losing compression while we were running. Because while we were cold, compression was at 350 or whatever. 350, 360. So let's see what our compression's supposed to be here. Really surprised the Green Bible doesn't even have a compression value in there. So like I said, we were at 350 to 360 on all 4 of them, and it was cold, and it's cold value, and it's not wet or dry or anything. It was just dry. So I was looking on some forums, and they said about 425 is where you want to be. So if you figure it's 350, drops down to probably 300 whenever it gets hot. So the piston rings needed to be changed on these guys. So it's good to give it a good freshen up anyways. Alright, so I got the last piston to install. I already installed the other 3. So this is the last one. So I thought I'd show you what I'm doing here or whatever with these. So what I'm doing is I'm going to put in new piston rings, since we already honed and cleaned the glaze off of the cylinders. And then I'm going to put some new bearings in here as well. So what you do, here's the 2 bolts. Take your bottom race or whatever it is off. There's the bearings. And actually, The bearings themselves, since this was already rebuilt once, the engine, the bearings are actually a plus or undersize 0.010 or whatever, if you can see that or whatever. But this is the crank has already been machined. So what I'm doing is I'm just cleaning off all the oil, all the old dirt and oil off of the bottom piece here. Was that the cap? That would be the connecting rod cap. Or some, I also noticed that these bearings are actually called the big end or something like that in the UK. I never heard of that one, so that's a new one. So I guess got it in some, cleaning it off in some lacquer thinner to clean off the inside. Take that bearing out too. Got that out of there. I also noticed around here, sorry, the lighting's not that great, but around here there was like a lot of caked up oil and grime right around the bolts themselves. So I've been cleaning that off real good. So whenever I torque it down, it gets flat against this surface right here. Okay, so I got that cleaned up. And these are the new bearings that I got. And what I got was Glyco, I guess that's called. But they're called ASEs. Land Rover, part number there, whatever. Actually, I guess they use them in a lot of different years up to 85. So new bearings here. What you do is you take this, and there's a little tang there. There's a lot of videos online showing you how to do all this stuff, but I'm just showing you what I'm doing. Just popping in a new one. Make sure the tang is lined up here, there, and around, and it's in there nice and tight. It's flat on both sides going around. And the same thing to this one. It's got the little tang on there. There you go. Now those are all lined up and in there. Once the bearings are in, I'm taking some lacquer thinner and cleaning off the bearings so they're as clean as possible on that surface right there. I got all my fingerprints off of it and cleaned it all up. There you go, those are all done. So the end bearings, they're in. And if you look at the old ones, this is part of the reason why I ended up replacing them. They're actually pretty scratched up. They're not very smooth, a little bit worn in. I think because when it sat there for so long, for 25 years, rust built up in there. And whenever I started it back up and getting oil pressure in it, it started scraping it pretty good. So it's best to just replace them while we have it off and taken apart. Okay, bearings are done. So then we got piston rings here. And that's the part number there. They're actually 20 over. The pistons are machined 20 over. And there's no name on the box or nothing, but it's blue, so I would say it's BritPart. But there's not even a BritPart number on it or nothing. So piston rings, they come together. You can see on there they have illustrations on which layer it goes on. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So what I do is I start down at the bottom one, because it's easier to put the bottom one on and then come up as I go up. Let's see, can you see that? There you go. And some people, they probably have their own way of doing this, which I give props to them on the way they want to do it. But from what I could see, is this seems like the easiest way to do it. I took the oil ring piece out of the inside, push that around onto there. You can see there's a little pin. Oh, you can see that. See where it slides together? Oh, it's kind of too dark. But there's a little pin in there that slides and holds the oil ring together. So then on here, make sure you read your top. The top needs to be up at the top. Make sure you do that. Always do that. And what I'm doing is where that piece is, where it kind of separates together with that little slide pin, I'm putting the gap on the opposite side of that. Less of a chance of it coming apart. There we go. Got one on there. So the next one, as you go down to your, you can see on there, this is the third one, there's the fourth one, here's the third one. You just take that out and read, make sure you got the top up on the top. And these are little just piston ring tools or whatever, just kind of spreads it apart, makes it a little easier to put on. But these rings are pretty spread out already, which I found to be kind of surprising, is how loose they are. Like in this way, like the gap, resting gap right here. The resting gap here seems to be rather large for these things. A lot bigger than what the original one was. And I did put a few of these rings into the cylinder to measure them, to see if the gap's right, and the gap's within specs. So I'm assuming they all are, since I did a few of them in there. Did one full set and checked them. Again, always check to see, make sure your top is on the top. There we go. So now we got them all in there, all the piston rings. So one thing, this is where's that Britannica guy on there on YouTube. I'm gonna set him up the way that he said to set him up. What is that name? Britannica Restorations up there in Canada. So I'm gonna put. So I'm not even going to tell you how to do this, so just go watch his video. But I'm going to set my rings up the same way he has his set up. So I'm not even going to explain it, because I'm sure I'm going to explain it wrong. So, but I know you want to have 60 to, would be 120 degrees in between each gap. So they're evenly placed around. Okay, so now I got them all placed, and I'm just going to take some oil, put it all down inside the creases. Just spread the oil all around and let the oil get down inside the rings where they rest down inside there. And cover your whole piston up with oil. I like to put a lot of oil on the piston whenever I'm going to go slide in the piston with the rings. There you go. Okay, so you got piston rings on. Then I got these nifty little rubber boots. They go onto the nut on the bottom, the bolt, so it doesn't scratch your crank whenever you go sliding in. There you go. This is the piston ring compressor. I had to buy one of these because I don't have one. For this style engine at least. For this size engine. Okay, so I got our, let me see if you can see that. All right, you got our piston ring compressor on. Okay, and what we got here is I'm going to use a little bit of ultra slick assembly lube. Put onto the bearings, so whenever we do a startup, it doesn't, so it has a little bit of lubricant on there before. See, it's real sticky and gooey. All right, so now we can go over and slide it into the block. All right, we got over here at the engine block. Squirt some oil down into the bore. Gonna spread that around inside. And take our piston, slide it down in. Carefully, slide it down in. You can see the V's all point towards the injector. It actually says it on there, injector side, on the top of the piston, so it always points towards the injector there. Take our hammer, the wood side, hold it snug and tight. There it is, piston's in. And take it and push it down. The crank is now pointing at the bottom. These two pistons are up, these ones are down. So I'm going to push it down. And now it just sitting onto the crank now, so we'll go down underneath. Okay, so here we are down underneath. You can see our plug here. Our covers are here. You see how it saves it from hitting the crank. Take the little rubber caps off. And the red you see is not blood. That's the slick stuff. So as we're down underneath here, I already put the slick stuff on the bearing cap. And then your little notch that's on here matches up with the other notch on this side. So you put them notch to notch, or whatever, tang to tang, or whatever you call those things. It is. It's on there. Kind of do one side at a time. Tighten them up a little bit at a time. Okay, so I'm rocking it back and forth. I don't have these torqued right now, any of these bearing caps, but I have them just kind of snugged on with my hand. too heavy, too strong, or anything. But I'm rocking it back and forth, and it's still really smooth. I don't feel any play in the arms as I go back and forth. So I think our bearings are on there and smooth. All I can feel is the kind of the cylinders going up and down. Really the only resistance that I feel on. So bearing caps are on. I'm going to find out what the torque is on these and then torque these down next. So I found out the torque on these are 25 foot-pounds. So I'm going to start doing these up. There you go. Got the first one done. Alright, so I'm going to go through and torque all these down. Next thing is the oil screen. Got the lock on there, the lock washer. And inside there's an O-ring, but the O-ring still looks good, and we're not really holding any major pressure back here, so I'm not going to replace that. Bit of a pain in the butt. Get that started. There you go. Alright, I'm going to snug this down and bend that tab over. Not much to talk about the oil pan, but taking the old seal off, I'm going to get a new one of these and put some lacquer thinner into the bottom of it to clean up any gook that's inside there, but it doesn't look too bad. Just kind of has just some random dirt and pieces around, so it doesn't look too bad. So I'm just going to clean this all up. Also cleaned up the oil pan while I was here and had this sitting out here drying off too, getting all the gook out of the bottom of it and cleaning it out. Put a little lacquer thinner in the bottom, cleaned that out. I have the oil pan installed now. A fresh new gasket, and put a little sealant on there. So the oil pan's on, so the bottom end is now done. Now the engine, the pistons are now installed and ready to go. So the bottom end is done, oil pan's in there. So from the oil pan up to the pistons is done so far. So the next step will be the cylinder head. So we'll work on that next. I'd like to say thank you to everybody. You're awesome, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next awesome video. Bye-bye.